Hello. In the first part of developing a real world web application using the Laravel 5.6 framework, we created our fresh new Laravel application and then we added in the authentication scaffolding. In the second part of this tutorial, we're going to set our project up in PhpStorm, and then we're going to also migrate or create our database for our project and then migrate our database. And we're going to just discuss a little bit about how to do that, just the very beginning portion of how to start working with the database. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to start up your PhpStorm integrated development environment. And so then just go ahead and open that up. And if you have a project open currently in PhpStorm, just go to the File menu, Close Project, and that will bring you to this screen right here. And what we want to do is click on this Open link down here. And then we want to just drill down to the root folder for our web application. And so if you've been following along with me, you'll know that mine is in var www html tutorials L56 tutorial. So I just want to highlight that folder and say OK. And that's going to open up my project for the first time in PhpStorm. Now, if this is the first time that you open the project, PhpStorm may index all the files and folders within it, and it'll say indexing down here. That's fine. Just go ahead and let it finish that task. I've already done mine, so it's not doing it. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to change a couple little settings for this project. So if you just come up to the File menu up here, click on File and then Settings. And then when the new window opens up, you want to look for languages and frameworks. And if that's closed, click this little arrow next to it and expand it open. And then find PHP and expand that one. And then just click on the word PHP. And over here on the right, you'll notice that I'm using PHP version 7.1. And I do have a command line interface interpreter for PHP set up in here as well. Yours may say no interpreter here. And if it does, these three little dots or ellipses next to the drop down box here, if you just click on that, it'll bring up a screen to set up the command line interface interpreter. And under this PHP executable field, you just want to click on these ellipses here and browse to the folder that contains the executable for PHP on your system. I'm using CentOS 7 and mine just happens to be /bin/PHP. And so then once you select that, that'll give you access to the command line interface interpreter within PhpStorm. So then at that point, you want to just click the OK button, and that will also make it available in this drop down for other projects that you may do in PhpStorm as well. And then the second thing that we're going to change is if you just under PHP scroll down a little ways here, you should have something that says Laravel here. If not, you may need to go to this help and look for additional plugins. And there is a Laravel one. PhpStorm may come up and ask you if you want to add it. Just go ahead and say yes, you want to add it in. And then you'll have this option available under PhpStorm. So I'm just going to go ahead and expand that. And under views and templates, we're not going to really change anything in here. But if you click on the word Laravel itself, you'll notice there's two checkboxes here. Just go ahead and place a check mark in the box next to enable plugin for this project. And then at that point, we can go ahead and click the OK button. Now that we have our project pretty much set up in PhpStorm to get us started here, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the database. Now, there's really a couple of options available to create the database. One, we could use the command line interface and just create a database and user that way. Or the way that I prefer to do things is I like using a graphical user interface called PHP My Admin. And if you just bring up my blog and you click the blog drop down and go to all articles, and then you locate the second article, part 2 in this tutorial, and you click on that link to go to that article. If you scroll a little ways down the article, you'll notice I do have a sentence in here where I say I would rather use a graphical interface. That is a link to PHPMyAdmin. And so if I just open that up and I show you, there is a button right here to the right-hand top portion of the page where you can download the latest version of PHPMyAdmin. It's fairly simple to set up. It's really easy to use. So if you want to go ahead and do that, that's how you can go ahead and do that. So that's what I'm going to be using. Now, the way that I do things on my development server is I did create a TLS certificate, which was, previously SSL. I set up an SSL certificate to use for localhost on my development server, and then I use that to access PHPMyAdmin, so I'm logging in securely on my local system. So the web address for me to access it is just https://localhost/PHPMyAdmin. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring that up and log in as the root user. And then once you get logged into PHPMyAdmin, in the left-hand or the right-hand pane, you'll notice there's some links running across the top of that page. You want to click on this user accounts link, and then that will list all the users that are currently set up to access MySQL. If you look just below that, you'll notice there's a new heading, and below that there is a link that says add user account. You want to click on that link, and then you'll notice there's a login information section. You want to go ahead and create a username for the user. So I'm just going to demonstrate and call it L56 tutorial. And then under this host name dropdown, it's currently on any host. You want to click that dropdown and change it to local host. And I like using this generate password button. And what it'll do is it'll generate a fairly secure password for me. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And you'll notice it puts in the password up here for you, and also gives you the plain text version that you can copy. So I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say copy that. So at this point in time, this is where I would actually plug in my information that I need in my .environment configuration file for my project. So I'm going to switch back to PhpStorm, and you would normally be using this .environment. However, I already have mine set up. So I'm just going to use the .environment.example so I can demonstrate to you how you would do it. So I'm just going to double click on that and open it up. And we're going to be focusing on all these that start with DB for the database. And the first three, the connection, the host, and the port, those should be fine just as they are. The only reason why those would change is if you set MySQL up to listen on a other than default port and on other than a default IP address. So unless you really know what you're doing and you know that you didn't set things up a special way, those should all be correct. I would just go ahead and leave those alone, not change those. So I did copy the password, so I'm going to go ahead and paste that in just after this db_password equals. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in there, and there's our password. And then the database and username, if we go back to PHPMyAdmin, if you look just below the login information right here where it says database for user account, you'll notice the first checkbox says create a database with the same name and grant all privileges, which is going to be fine for our local development. So I'm going to go ahead and place a check mark in that box. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a database named L56 tutorial. And it's also going to create a user with a username of L56 tutorial. So they're both going to be the same. So I'm just going to highlight that and copy that and go back to PHPMyAdmin. And I would paste that in there for both database name and username. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in there twice. And at this point, we have all of our connection information in for the database. So then we would want to go back to PHPMyAdmin, and the only thing we have to do at this point is scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, and on the far right hand side you'll see this go button. You want to press that go button. Now I'm not going to do it because I had already set the database up, but that's what you would do at that point, and that would create everything that you need, and you would be ready to go. So then if we go back to PhpStorm, I'm just going to go ahead and close this out because I'm obviously not using it. But before I close it out, one last thing is I did set up a TLS or SSL certificate for a domain name l56tutorial.com to use locally for development purposes. And so I changed this app underscore URL equals to https://www.l56tutorial.com. If you did the same thing, then you would obviously do the same thing, but you would put your domain name in here after the www. If you didn't set up an SSL certificate, but you still created an Apache vhost alias, that's fine. You just may not be able to work through some of the parts of the tutorial where we're going to be using secure pages. So you would just put in http without the s ://www.yourdomainname.com. So that's the only other thing that I changed in here at this point in time. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Now, before we actually migrate the database, which is creating our database tables, if you look on the left hand under project in PhpStorm, you'll notice there is a folder called database. If you expand that folder open, you'll see there's 3 other folders in here, one called factories, one called migrations, and one called seeds. And the migrations folder is the one that actually creates all of our tables, or say just adds additional fields to our tables if we needed them, or additional columns, I should say. The seeds folder is a way for us to create database seeders, so we can seed a table with records, for example. So that way we have some test data. We can do the same thing with the factories. Both of these are identical. They're similar. They're not exactly the same, but they're similar. And we could use either way to seed or create test data to insert into our database. We're going to be using or covering both ways, actually. So at this point in time, I just want you to understand that this is a way to create records to insert into our database. Or we can do some other things as well, but we're not going to cover that right here. If we click on the migrations or expand the migrations folder, you'll notice that there is 2 migrations in here. These are 2 that we got for free when we used the authentication scaffolding with Laravel. It gave us the migration to create a users table, and it gave us the migration to create a password resets table. Now, obviously, that would be used when somebody forgets their password. The create users table, if we just double click on that and open that up, and we take a quick look at it, whenever we use a PHP artisan command to create a migration, we will get a basic starting point. And this is something that we will get when we run the artisan command. It'll give us an up function and a down function. And the up function is used to basically create a table or just add, say, a new column to our existing table, or we could add a couple of columns to an existing table. The down function does exactly the opposite of the up function. So in this case, we're creating the table from scratch. We've never created it before. So the complete opposite of that would be to drop the table if it exists. So that's what the down function does. So just to reiterate, the up function is used to create the table or add additional columns to the table. And the down function does the complete opposite of what the up function does. So if you're familiar at all with MySQL and rollbacks, for example, the down function is basically doing a rollback for us. So I just wanted to get that understanding across to you. So at this point, we're ready to migrate our database for the first time. And so if we open up a terminal window, and we change to the root directory of our web application. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. Okay, that'd help if I know how to spell. Doesn't have a Q in it. Okay, so if you want to see the directory that you're working in, there is a Linux command. It's called pwd, which stands for print working directory. And if we run that, you'll see now that I am in the var www html tutorials l56 tutorial directory. So I'm just going to go ahead and clear my screen out. And if we just put in PHP artisan, we should know at this point in time, and we run that, it'll give us a list of Laravel PHP artisan commands that are available. And if we scroll up to the top here, you'll see that there is one called migrate. And this runs the database migrations. So that will run these two migrations that are in here, the create users table and the create password resets table. There is some other migrate commands available. We're not going to really use them right away. We may use them a little bit further in the tutorial, but we'll cover that at that point. So I'm just going to clear my screen out. And if I put in PHP artisan space migrate, and I press the enter key, nothing to migrate. Okay, and that's because I had already run it once before. So I'm just going to quickly drop these from the database and go back and just clear my screen out and execute that again. You'll see that it runs the migrations. So it created a users table and a password resets table. So now if we go back to PHPMyAdmin and we click on our database over here on the left-hand pane, it'll show us that it did create 3 tables. It created a migrations table, which we won't be changing or modifying in any way. But anytime you run migrations, it basically keeps track of the migrations. So you'll see that it did create our password resets table and it did create our users table. So if we click on the users table, for example, you'll see there is actually no data in the table at this point in time. But if we click on this structure tab up here, you'll see that, yes, we do have an ID, a name, an email, a password, a remember token, a created at, and an updated at. So if we go back and we look at that, you'll see that we had an ID field, a name field, an email, password field, remember token, and our timestamps, which that creates two timestamps. It creates the created at and the updated at timestamp. So that pretty much concludes part 2 of our tutorial. We'll see you in part 3.